Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're tackling a genuinely fascinating question. How exactly does a quirky, low-budget comedy about completely banal suburban life break national ratings records and become an absolute cultural touchstone? Well, we're going to break down the anatomy of an absolute Australian phenomenon, the iconic television series Kath Kim. It's literally a masterclass in satire, and honestly, the story behind its success is just as entertaining as the show itself.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our structural roadmap for today. First up, the hornbags of Fountain Lakes. Then, speaking the suburban lingo. Third, the real Fountain Gate. Fourth, ratings, remakes, and records. And finally, an effluent 20-year legacy. Section 1. The hornbags of Fountain Lakes.
At its heart, Kath Kim is just this brilliant, hilariously relatable exploration of a mother-daughter dynamic. It's set in the fictional Melbourne suburb of Fountain Lakes, following two women who are desperately striving for what they call effluence, while, of course, spectacularly missing the mark on good taste. And this dynamic wasn't just acted, it was meticulously crafted from the ground up. Creators Jane Turner and Gina Riley starred as the titular characters themselves. We've got Turner playing Kath Day-Night, the super cheery middle-aged mom obsessed with high-waisted pants and keeping fit. Then there's Riley as Kim, her lazy, astonishingly self-centered daughter who just keeps moving back home. And the backup, an absolute comedy dream team. Glenn Robbins as Cal Knight, the metrosexual purveyor of fine meats, Peter Rosethorn as Kim's deeply henpecked husband Brett, and of course, the brilliant Magda Zubensky as Sharon Strzelecki, Kim's incredibly unlucky in love second best friend. The chemistry between these five was just absolute magic.
And it wasn't just that core cast making the show sparkle either. The series pulled in a staggering lineup of massive guest stars who just had to be in on the joke. I mean, we're talking global icons like Kylie Minogue playing a grown-up version of Kim's baby and the absolute legend Barry Humphries. But my favorite part? Huge international stars like Michael Bublé and Matt Lucas actually approached the producers begging to make an appearance simply because they were such massive fans of the show. It is just genuinely hilarious to think of these global superstars wanting nothing more than to hang out in the tacky suburbs of Fountain Lakes.
Moving right along to Section 2, speaking the suburban lingo.
So much of the hyper-local feel of this universe was completely driven by the script. The writers basically fabricated this entire suburban lingo that somehow managed to infiltrate the actual Australian cultural lexicon. If you were anywhere in Australia in the 2000s, there is no way you could walk through a schoolyard or an office without hearing this phrase daily. Look at my, look at my, look at my. It was Kath's iconic rapid-fire catchphrase to just instantly command attention and shut down any argument. And then, of course, there was their classic sign-off for mutual agreement. It's Noice, different, and unusual. These weren't just funny lines. They literally became social currency in the real world. And this brilliantly illustrates something else too. The writing relied heavily on a linguistic concept known as an eggcorn. So an eggcorn is the substitution of a word for a similar sounding one, almost always with absolutely hilarious results. For instance, the characters would constantly say they were ravishing when they actually meant ravenous, or they'd brag all about their effluent lifestyle instead of an affluent one. The creators used these hypercorrections to make the dialogue so endlessly quotable. They were trying so hard to sound sophisticated, which of course only highlighted their glorious banality.
Which brings us to Section 3, the real Fountain Gate.
But words are really only half the story here. The physical setting of the show was absolutely crucial to its sharp satire. One of the main hubs for these characters was the local shopping center, which they constantly called Fountain Gate. Well, here is the surprising reality behind that television illusion. Even though the show cemented Fountain Gate's fame worldwide, the vast majority of those mall scenes, they were actually filmed at a completely different shopping center entirely, Westfield Southland in Cheltenham. It's just a really great example of TV magic creating a unified world out of totally disparate locations.
Even so, the spirit of the real Fountain Gate was undeniably captured by the show. Just listen to this fantastic anecdote shared on ABC Radio by Rita, who was a former Fountain Gate Kmart worker back in the 1980s. She said, "I had a root and spiral perm, huge hair, and I've always said that perhaps the producers of Kath Kim saw me at the checkouts and I was the inspiration." I absolutely love that quote. It's like sharing this delightful, slightly absurd little secret. It just shows how deeply real Australians saw themselves and their own wildly exaggerated past reflected directly in these characters.
And then we have the iconic Chateau Kath itself. The actual physical house was located in Patterson Lakes, Victoria, backing right onto a canal, and the ABC rented it for the entire run of the series. But, time marches on. In 2016, that property was sold for nearly $1.5 million. And the contrast between this modest, unapologetically tacky TV suburban house and that massive $1.5 million real estate reality, it perfectly highlights the absolute absurdity of the modern housing market compared to the show's working-class roots. Interestingly enough, before the house was eventually demolished in July 2022, the owners hosted a charity open day in 2019. They let fans walk right through those hollowed halls and raised $20,000 in the process. Just a really beautiful final bow for a piece of TV history.
Part 4, Ratings, Remakes, and Records.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer trajectory of the audience. The show started incredibly strong on the ABC in 2002, pulling in 1.25 million average viewers. For Australian television, that is massive. By season 3, it had climbed to over 1.8 million. But wait until you hear about season 4. The show made the jump from the ABC to the commercial 7 network, and the ratings completely exploded. The premiere of season 4 peaked at over 2.7 million viewers. At the time, that made it the highest rating episode in Australian television history. It was just an absolute juggernaut.
And it wasn't just a massive commercial hit, it was a total critical darling too. Across its run, Kath and Kim essentially swept the industry awards. Right out of the gate in 2002, they won multiple AFI awards, including Best Screenplay. They completely dominated the Logie Awards for years, and this is the really impressive part. They took home trophies for both Most Outstanding Comedy, which is voted by the industry, and Most Popular Light Entertainment, which is voted by the public. Having that dual appeal is incredibly rare. Usually you see critics gravitating toward highbrow concepts while the public leans into broad comedy. Kath and Kim somehow managed to conquer both at the exact same time.
Because of all this phenomenal success, the American network NBC decided to attempt a U.S. remake in 2008. They brought in Molly Shannon and Selma Blair. But wow, it truly became a tale of two shows. The U.S. adaptation completely failed to capture the original's magic and was canceled after just 17 episodes. Crucially, and this is a big one, the character of Sharon didn't even appear in the U.S. version at the insistence of Magda Subansky. That detail alone really emphasizes the unique, lightning-in-a-bottle chemistry of the original Australian creators and cast. You really just cannot manufacture that kind of authenticity. Back in Australia, however, the original cast could do absolutely no wrong. In 2012, they took these hyper-suburban, tracksuit-wearing characters straight to the big screen with the feature film Kath and Kim Dorella. Filmed partially in Positano, Italy, it was a smash hit. It pulled in a massive $2.1 million at the Australian box office in its opening weekend alone. The sheer irony of these intensely local characters traveling all the way to Europe to pursue high-class effluence is just the perfect narrative closure to their story.
And finally, Section 5, an effluent 20-year legacy.
So the show didn't just fade away, it evolved. It mapped out this remarkable longevity that culminated in a major television anniversary not too long ago. Tracing the evolution of these characters is wild because it is extremely rare for sketch comedy spin-off characters to maintain relevance for 2 solid decades. They started as sketch origins way back in the mid-1990s on the show Big Girl's Blouse. Then we got the iconic series premiere in 2002, the movie in 2012, and finally those massive 20th anniversary specials in 2022. Titled Our Effluent Life and 20 Preposterous Years, these specials proved the audience was absolutely still there, treating fans to unseen clips and a whole host of celebrity guests, reflecting on the show's undeniable impact. So what does this all mean? It leaves us with this final, genuinely provocative question. Why do we love watching our own boring, suburban lives reflected right back at us? Perhaps the true genius of Kath and Kim wasn't just that it mocked the banality of everyday life, but that it did so with such profound affection. It allowed us to laugh at our own pretensions, our own ridiculous fashion choices, and our own family dysfunctions. Ultimately, it made the ordinary feel truly extraordinary. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.